welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. So, in full disclosure, this was not how I intended to start this channel. I intended to start this channel by talking about The Godfather and explaining why I think that movie is a masterpiece and absolutely deserves its recognition, but isn't quite perfect. I actually do think there's a pretty significant flaw with that movie that I never see acknowledged. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. But for context, I'm filming this on January 11th. And here in the US, we started this year off with one hell of a banner week, capped off with the murder of Renee Good at the hands of the ICE Gestapo agents. And what disturbs me most is not even that, but it's seeing how many of my fellow Americans online are not just defending, but outright celebrating this. And after a few days of just reflecting on all that, I just needed a movie to make me feel good. There's lots of movies I could turn to for that. There's pretty much the entirety of the Pixar catalog I could have chosen. I grew up with the Harry Potter films. Those are definitely comfort movies for me. But right now, in particular, when I needed something to remind me that there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity, I knew there was only one movie to turn to. Released in 2014, the Grand Budapest Hotel chronicles the adventures of head concierge Gustav and his new lobby boy Zero as they try to solve the murder of a beloved guest. That is a very loose description that doesn't go into too much detail. I'm going to try to keep this overview fairly spoiler-free. This is a classic Wes Anderson film, and it's definitely my personal favorite of his. Wes Anderson is a very divisive director. In a way, he kind of reminds me of Tarantino, which might sound like an odd comparison. I'm not saying his films are similar, but he reminds me of Tarantino in the sense that he has such a unique and distinct style that you almost immediately know within the first minute that you're watching one of his films. And he structures and tells his stories in such unconventional ways that his movies are basically a genre in and of themselves. And so that very basic setup of them trying to solve a murder mystery, it ends up turning into an art heist, then it turns into a prison escape, then it turns into a tracking down this greater conspiracy. It's like every 30 minutes changing genres. And that might not work for everyone. A lot of times movies that try things like that don't quite work for me. But in this case it does. And I think it's primarily because it's a Wes Anderson film, because this movie has such a consistent tone, such a consistent sense of style, that all those changes work and keeps the story flowing.
All of this just works. I'm not kidding.
I'll also say that, like Tarantino, Wes Anderson can arguably be more style than substance at times. But this is a movie where that style absolutely not only has substance, the style is part of the substance itself. The style, as I'll unpack later, is like one of the key thematic points of this movie. All these perfectly balanced shots, the absolute meticulous attention to detail, serves them really, really well for this sort of earlier period piece. And I wish he'd go even earlier more often. At least from what I've seen, most of his movies seem to take place sometime between the 1960s to the modern day. And that's fine, but man, based off this movie, I would love to see him do more like American Roaring Twenties or Victorian Gilded Age. It seems like that sort of time period would be even better for his sensibilities, and I'd love to see him go there more often. But if he never does go to this time period again, at least we got this. Now, for why this movie in particular is such a comfort for me, again, first off, the Wes Anderson style is part of it, and the fact that it's executed so well here. And I mean, just look at it. are shots in this movie that are so decadent. The set design, the costumes, the bright colors, the everything. It's like watching a children's picture book brought to life. And so yeah, just getting lost in the pure visuals of this is always a joy. You can completely turn your mind off. You can probably turn the sound off even and just watch this and genuinely enjoy yourself. The next part about this movie that I really, really enjoy and appreciate is the structure. So basically, the way this movie starts is we're in the modern day, and we have a girl going to a graveyard to visit the grave of this author. And while there, she starts reading one of his books. So we go from the modern day to in the 1980s, when the author is narrating at the beginning of this book and explaining that he's going to be telling us a real life story. Then we cut to the 1960s, when a younger version of that author goes to this ran down ruin of a hotel over in Eastern Europe and comes across the owner, Zero, who started off as a lobby boy at that hotel. And then Zero tells the author his story of how he went from a lobby boy to the owner. And we cut back to the 1930s, 1931 specifically, I believe. And that's where most of our story takes place. So this is like a Russian nesting doll of stories. We have a story within a story within a story within a story. I think it's a little bit of a Robert Downey Jr. and Tropic Thunder situation.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude. What?
Literally, this is a movie about a girl reading a book about an author who's reflecting on a time when someone else told him their own story. It just says something about the power of storytelling, that it keeps getting retold, that it never goes away, that as someone who loves stories, as someone who wants to be a storyteller myself, there's just something comforting to me about that. And I know that whole setup I just said might sound really confusing, but when you're actually watching the movie, it's really not, because 90% of it is in the 1930s, with the occasional flash forward, I should say, to the 1960s, when we're getting the author hearing the story in real time. And we only get those outer two layers at the very beginning, very end, to kind of bookend the movie. And so that whole structure is just a comfort in and of itself for me. Next, we have to talk about the actors. We have Tony Revolori as Zero, who does a wonderful job as kind of our insight into this movie. He's one of the more normal, grounded presence here. We have, I'm not sure how to say her name. Is it Saoirse Ronan as Agatha, who doesn't have a ton to do in this movie, but is very good with what she does have. She makes a really big impression with the small screen time.
She's charming. She's so charming.
Is he flirting with you?
Yes.
Outside of that, we have, Wes Anderson's typical trope. Another one of his calling cards. He has this group of actors that he works with consistently, and they're all in here. We've got Bill Murray, Owen Wilson, Edward Norton, Adrian Brody, Jeff Goldblum, Willem Dafoe, and several more. I don't want to spoil everyone. Outside of his usual trip even, there's a couple pretty big name surprises in here. But of course, the number one performance that all this movie is centered around, and I think the reason why I cite this as my favorite Wes Anderson film, is Ralph Fiennes as Gustav.
Wow. What?
Who's Gustav H?
I'm afraid that's me, darling.
Ralph Fiennes just seems like he's having the time of his life throughout this whole movie. And it is so fun to see him playing so against type here. Like, you gotta bear in mind, this is a guy who basically started his career playing one of the most horrifyingly realistic Nazis ever in Schindler's List. Since then, he's played serial killers, he's played crooks, he's played ruthless bastards of all flavors, and is probably most famous for playing Voldemort, a wizard Nazi. And so to have this guy in particular, who's well known not just for playing bad guys, but playing Nazis specifically, as this character who, yeah, he has a firm grip over the hotel for sure, but he also has humanity. He shows a charitable side. He genuinely cares about both his guests and his employees. He has encounters with Nazis in this movie, which is something I'll get to in a moment. And he's very much not a fascist. And so, even if you don't know anything about Ralph Fiennes' history as an actor, just watching him in this movie is a joy. Watching his timing, both physically and with his dialogue. I mean, there's a point where he just turns and runs, and it is one of the funniest goddamn things I've ever seen. And the dialogue, like, not every actor could handle this kind of 1,000 words a minute, just talking, fast dialogue that is so intricate and so precise. And then he'll just say something so blunt and vulgar that it's shocking.
She was dynamite in the sack, by the way.
She was 84.
I've had older.
And credit to Wes Anderson for writing that, but also huge credit for Ralph Fiennes for pulling it off. And like I said, when you actually know about his history as an actor, that just adds such an ironic layer on all of it that especially makes some of the more dramatic scenes hit a bit harder. And then the humor. Like I said, it's not just Ralph Fiennes. This whole movie is relentlessly hilarious. There are so many jokes, there are so many visual gags. It just never stops. There's always something. And with the whole setup and look of it, it feels like it might be a little stuffy at first, but it's really not. There's all kinds of humor in here. There's slapstick, there's witty wordplay, there's everything. There are just few movies that make me actually chuckle this much even after watching them several times. You know, I think it's very underrated as just a pure comedy. The thing is, for a movie that is this, like, almost violently whimsical, there is a real undercurrent of dreadness and sadness to it. And I think that's for a few reasons. Reason one, we've already seen the ruin this hotel becomes. We know that this beautiful, decadent time, it's not going to last forever. We know that it's eventually going to fall apart somehow. Reason two is Agatha. When Agatha is first mentioned, the aged narrator Zero just immediately moves on because he refuses to talk about her. And then when the story gets to such a point that he can't avoid talking about her, he can't stop crying at the mere mention of her name. And so we know that something is going to happen to her eventually. And as the movie goes on and our heroes are getting into more and more perilous situations that she's trying to help them out of, there's just this growing tension, this growing dread as we're waiting to see what's going to happen to her, until eventually we find out what happened and why older Zero feels the way he does. And last but not least, I mentioned earlier Ralph Fiennes and his history as a Nazi being kind of important. This movie is set in Eastern Europe in 1931, and it's never at the forefront. This isn't a World War II film. It's not a Rise of the Nazis film, but it's happening in the background. We see in newspapers headlines about tanks rolling up to the borders. We see trains getting stopped and these grim gray-suited soldiers checking people for passports. Later we see these soldiers upgrading to black uniforms with a very familiar-looking ZZ arm. The movie never says Nazi, but we know what's happening here. And we know, in a way that our characters don't, that there is some true evil coming around the corner. And sure enough, we get to the last 5-10 minutes of this movie. And for a movie that is this lighthearted and is so funny and is just so relentlessly upbeat almost, the last 5 to 10 minutes are just so sad. As we see these characters who we've come to know and care for and enjoy meet some really awful fates. Fates that are just cold and uncaring and brutal and undeserved. Now, you might think it's weird that I'm picking a movie that ends on those kind of notes as a comfort movie, but that's really part of the point. You see, the ending kind of reframes and recontextualizes everything we saw. And so we realize that all this beautiful nostalgia, which is probably part of why the core story is so beautiful. Zero's literally telling it through a nostalgic lens, so of course it all looks childlike and colorful and beautiful. But once we understand where he's coming from, we realize that this decadent nostalgia, it's not an indulgence, it's mourning. It is the last grip on something precious that is gone. And it's not overly romanticizing the past. It's still showing flaws. It definitely shows that even Gustav's time was not perfect. But how do I put this? It's showing the past was not perfect, but that something has been lost. Something really core to our humanity seems like it was destroyed. And just look at the architecture. Look at that bright pink hotel versus what it becomes. Hell, look at that versus our modern architecture where everything's just some flavor of gray box. You see, this is part of why a lot of so-called comfort movies don't really work for me. When movies are purely, everything's beautiful, everything's wonderful. No, it's not. That's not real. That's not real life. Real life is not good vibes only. Real life has ups and it has downs. Real life can be so beautiful, and real life can be so relentlessly cruel. And often in the same breath. That's why I think this movie in particular is such a comfort for me. This movie doesn't ignore the darkness. It acknowledges it, and it still chooses kindness. This day and age in particular, that is something that hits really hard. You know what, I think my favorite moment in this movie might actually be, there's a scene about 2/3 of the way through where Gustav goes on this really horrible racist rant against Zero after Zero makes a couple little mistakes. And basically caps it off by demanding to know what Zero was even doing in this civilized country versus the hovel he grew up in. And then Zero explains, well, it's because of war. It's because he's basically a refugee and had no choice. And the reason I love this moment so much is when Gustav hears that, he realizes, oh, shit, I just said something awful. You see him in real time feel guilt and remorse, and he apologizes profusely. And man, I am so used to seeing people just double down on their most horrid rhetoric. I am so used to people feeling no semblance of shame or guilt or remorse about anything. That moment of humanity just, oh my god, it's cathartic to actually see someone feel bad for something that they should feel bad for, to actually see someone sincerely apologize for something that they should apologize for. It's like I said, man, it really feels like something has been lost. But just because it's been lost doesn't mean we have to forget it. The hotel might be gone, but there's still someone reading about it. And if we can remember, maybe it's not gone completely. Maybe we're just waiting for it to come back. And that, call me crazy, but that's comforting for me. So, that's why Grand Budapest Hotel is my personal favorite comfort movie and my favorite Wes Anderson movie. How about you, dear audience? Do you have a Wes Anderson movie you like better than this? What are your favorite comfort movies? Let me know down below. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay sane